Evangeline Hartwell screamed as she plummeted from Devil's Drop, her white wedding dress billowing like broken wings against the canyon walls. The rope around her wrists had been cut. Sheriff Barnabas Colt watched from above with satisfaction carved into his weathered face. The jagged rocks rushed toward her. Death stretched its arms wide, then the rope around her waist went taut. Pain shot through her ribs as the line caught. She swung hard against the cliff face, her cheek scraping stone. Blood trickled warm down. Her jaw, above, Colt's boots scraped gravel as he peered over the edge. "Should have taken my offer, Miss Hartwell." His voice echoed off canyon walls. Should have been reasonable. Evangeline hung suspended, 30 feet below the rim. Her breathing came shallow and quick. The rope held steady. Someone had prepared for this moment. Someone had been waiting. Colt's footsteps retreated. His horse whinnied. Hoofbeats faded into silence. The sun blazed overhead. Sweat mixed with blood on her torn cheek. Her wrists burned where the bindings had been. The wedding dress, pristine, white that morning, now bore streaks of red dust and stone. A shadow moved across the canyon floor below. A figure emerged from behind a boulder pile. Tall, lean, hack pulled low. He moved with purpose toward the cliff face. The rope began to lift. Hand over hand, steady and sure. Evangeline's boots scraped against stone as she rose. Her rescuer worked in silence. No words of comfort, no explanation. Just the methodical pull of someone accustomed to hard work. At the ledge, strong hands pulled her to safety. She collapsed onto solid ground, chest heaving. Her rescuer crouched beside her, checking for broken bones with practiced fingers. His touch was gentle but impersonal, medical. She looked up into pale blue eyes beneath the brim of a worn hat. Lines mapped his face like dried riverbeds. His mouth stayed closed, waiting. "Thank you." Her voice came out cracked. "How did you?" "No." He studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled a small wooden token from his vest pocket. Carved into its surface was a crude image of a cliff and a falling figure. Below that, a rope. "You knew this would happen." She struggled to sit up. "You were waiting." He helped her stand, one hand steady on her elbow. His other hand gestured toward a narrow trail leading away from the canyon rim. "Away from town. Away from Colt. I can't leave." She brushed dust from her torn skirt. "Not yet." His eyebrows raised slightly. The first expression she'd seen cross his face. "There are things you don't understand." She touched the wooden token in his palm. "About Sheriff Colt. About what he's done." The man's jaw tightened. He pulled out another token. This one showed a badge. A gun. A grave marker. "You know about Josiah." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You know he's dead." 3 days earlier, Evangeline had stepped off the stagecoach with hope filling her chest like warm bread. The letter from Josiah Pembroke had been kind, respectful. He'd written about his general store, about needing a wife to help build something lasting in Crimson Ridge. The town had looked promising from the coach window. Clean storefronts, a church steeple, children playing in the street. Sheriff Colt met her at the station instead of Josiah. Tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading his dark hair. Handsome in a hard way. His smile never reached his eyes. "Miss Hartwell, welcome to Crimson Ridge." He tipped his hat. "I'm afraid there's been a change of plans." The general store stood empty. Dust coated the counter. Broken glass sparkled on the floor near the back room. Colt explained that Josiah had gotten cold feet. Run off in the night. Left his business behind. Happens sometimes with bachelor men. Colt's voice carried easy authority. They get scared when reality sets in. But Evangeline had seen the overturned chair, the dark stains on the floorboards, the way the townspeople averted their eyes when she asked questions. That evening, Colt knocked on her hotel room door. He'd cleaned up for the occasion, fresh shirt, cologne that couldn't quite mask the smell of tobacco and leather. Seems to me you're in a difficult position. He leaned against the doorframe. No husband, no money for passage home, no prospects. She kept her hand on the door, ready to close it. I'll manage. I'm sure you would. You seem like a capable woman. His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. But why struggle when there's an easier path? What are you suggesting? Marry me instead. The words came out matter of fact, like ordering supplies. I need a wife. You need security. Josiah's loss could be our gain. She closed the door without answering. The next morning brought Josiah's hidden journal. She'd found it wedged behind a loose board in the store's back room. Page after page of careful handwriting documented. Colt's crimes. Protection money collected from businesses. Travelers who disappeared after flashing too much gold. Suspicious accidents befalling anyone who challenged his authority. The final entry was dated 3 days before her arrival. He knows I've been watching, asking questions. If something happens to me, the new sheriff in Tucson should know. Colt isn't what he seems. The town lives in fear. Someone has to stop him. Colt found her reading it that afternoon. Curious thing about curious people. He closed the door behind him. They tend to have accidents. Evangeline clutched the journal to her chest. People will ask questions if I disappear too, will they? He moved closer. A mail-order bride who got scared and ran off. Happens all the time in towns like this. You killed him. Josiah made poor choices. Asked the wrong questions. Stuck his nose where it didn't belong. Colt's hand rested on his gun belt. You don't have to make the same mistakes. I won't marry you. You will. His voice turned cold as winter wind. Because if you don't, this town burns, starting with the schoolhouse. 23 children attend classes there, Miss Hartwell. Their blood would be on your hands. Now standing on the canyon rim with her silent rescuer, Evangeline understood the full scope of Colt's evil. The man beside her had known, had been waiting, had prepared. She studied his weathered face, the careful way he held himself, the medical precision with which he'd checked her injuries. You're not just a cowboy. She touched his arm. Who are you? He pulled out another wooden token. This one showed 2 figures in uniform. Brothers in arms. One of them bore a striking resemblance to Sheriff Colt. The other looked like a younger version of the man standing beside her. Thunder rolled across the canyon. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The air tasted of rain and secrets long buried. Her rescuer pocketed the tokens and gestured again toward the trail leading away from town. I can't run. She shook her head. Not while innocent people suffer. He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and final. They would return to Crimson Ridge together. The storm was coming. The silent cowboy led her through twisting canyon passages where sunlight barely reached the stone floor. Water dripped from hidden springs. Their footsteps echoed soft against weathered rock. His sanctuary lay tucked behind a curtain of hanging vines. A natural cave carved smooth by centuries of wind and water. Blankets folded neat in one corner. Supplies arranged with military precision. A fire ring blackened by countless meals. He gestured for her to sit on a flat boulder padded with wool. His hands moved gentle as he examined the cuts on her face. From a leather satchel, he withdrew clean cloth and a brown bottle that smelled of medicine. The antiseptic stung. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. He worked in silence, fingers steady and sure. These were not the hands of a simple drifter. Too practiced, too knowing. You've done this before. She watched his face. Tended wounds. He glanced up briefly. Pale eyes held depths she couldn't fathom. From his vest, he produced another wooden token. This one showed a field tent with a red cross. Soldiers lying on stretchers. A man in uniform kneeling beside them. You were a medic. He nodded once. returned to cleaning her wounds. The silence stretched comfortable between them. Rain began pattering against the cave mouth. The storm had arrived. Thunder rolled across the canyon like distant artillery. He stiffened at the sound. His hand stilled against her cheek. "The war," she kept her voice soft. "It's still with you." Another token appeared. This one showed flames consuming a town. Bodies scattered in the street. A figure kneeling among the dead. What happened? He pulled back, capping the medicine bottle. His jaw worked wordlessly. The muscles in his throat moved but produced no sound. "You can't speak." Understanding dawned slow and terrible, "or you won't." He touched his throat, shook his head once. The distinction mattered to him. Night settled over the canyon like a heavy blanket. He built a small fire with practiced efficiency. Flame danced against cave walls, painting shadows that writhed and twisted. She studied the collection of wooden tokens he'd arranged on a flat stone between them. Each carving told a piece of his story. A recruitment poster, men in blue uniforms, battlefields strewn with broken bodies, a woman in a white dress, her face worn smooth by countless touches. "She was important to you." Evangeline touched the token gently. His shoulders sagged. He pulled out another carving. The same woman, but this time she lay still. A grave marker stood beside her. "I'm sorry." He gathered the tokens with careful reverence, all except one. The final carving showed two men in uniform. One wore a sergeant's stripes. The other bore the insignia of a field medic, brothers in arms. Trust built through shared horror. "Sheriff Colt." She recognized the sergeant's face now. "He was your friend." The cowboy's hands clenched into fists. Fire popped and sparked. Shadows danced wilder across his weathered features. From his shirt pocket, he withdrew a different token, freshly carved, still bearing wood shavings. This one showed a man in a sheriff's badge standing over a pile of gold coins, Confederate money scattered at his feet. "He betrayed you." The words came out whispered. "Sold you out." The cowboy stood abruptly, paced to the cave entrance. Rain streaked down in silver sheets. Lightning split the sky like a sword cut. Evangeline followed him, stood close enough to feel the tension radiating from his frame. "That's why you were waiting at the cliff. You've been tracking him." He turned to face her. In the lightning's glare, she saw the full weight of his burden. Years of pain carried in silence. Justice deferred but not forgotten. "How long?" He held up 3 fingers, then made a cutting motion across his palm. 3 years since his voice died. 3 years of living like a ghost. "We can't beat him alone." She touched his arm. "The town lives in fear." "But fear can be broken." He shook his head, gestured toward the tokens showing dead soldiers and burning buildings. "This isn't war." Her voice carried quiet steel. "This is home. These are families. Children who deserve better." Rain drummed harder against stone. The fire guttered in the wind but held steady. He pulled out his carving knife, selected a piece of smooth wood from his supplies. His hands moved, with practiced skill, shaping meaning from raw material. This token showed 2 paths diverging. One led toward mountains and safety. The other wound back toward town and danger. "You want to run?" She studied the carving. "Take me away from here." He nodded, touched the safe path with 1 finger. "But running won't stop him. Won't save the next woman who refuses his demands." The knife paused in his hands. He looked up at her with something approaching surprise. "I've been running my whole life." She settled beside him on the stone. "From a father who drank, from a town that whispered, from men who thought they owned me because I had nowhere else to go." The carving resumed. Slow, deliberate cuts that curled away from the blade. Josiah's journal mentioned other women. Other disappearances. How many more will there be if we leave? His hands stilled. The knife trembled slightly in his grip. You tracked Colt for 3 years, learned his patterns, found his weakness. She touched the fresh token. But revenge isn't justice. He met her eyes. Something passed between them in the firelight. An understanding deeper than words. Help me save them. Her voice barely rose above the rain. Help me give them hope. He set down the knife. Reached for a different piece of wood. This carving showed a schoolhouse with children playing outside. Their faces bright with laughter. You've seen them. She leaned closer. The children, he nodded. Added details to their small figures. A girl with braids. A boy throwing a ball. Innocence carved in miniature. Colt threatened to burn the school if I didn't marry him. 23 children, he said. The knife slipped. Drew a thin line of blood across his thumb. He didn't seem to notice. That's his power. Making people choose between resistance and protecting what they love. He sucked the blood from his thumb, stared into the fire. The flames reflected in. His pale eyes turned them molten. Another token emerged from his pocket. This one was old, worn smooth by handling. It showed a single word carved in careful letters. Voice. You lost more than speech. Understanding hit her like cold water. You lost your purpose. He touched his throat again. The gesture carried weight of unshed tears. Find it again. She covered his scarred hands with hers. Help me give voice to the voiceless. Thunder crashed overhead. Lightning illuminated the canyon in stark white relief. When darkness returned, something had changed in his face. He pulled out the token showing 2 paths. With deliberate precision, he snapped off the branch leading to safety. Only one road remained. Back to Crimson Ridge, back to Colt, back to the reckoning 3 years in the making. He gathered his tokens with ritual care. Each carved piece a memory, a wound, a promise kept or broken. The last token he placed in her palm, freshly carved, still warm from his hands. It showed 2 figures standing side by side, no longer alone. Rain continued its steady drumbeat against stone. The fire burned lower but never died. In the darkness beyond the cave mouth, Crimson Ridge waited. Colt would expect her to run, to disappear into the wilderness like a frightened animal. He would be wrong. The silent cowboy rose and began packing his supplies. No hesitation now. Purpose moved through him like water through drought-cracked earth. They would return at dawn. Together. The storm was passing, but the reckoning had just begun. Dawn broke gray and cold over Crimson Ridge. Evangeline pulled the borrowed hat low over her face and wrapped a dusty shawl around her shoulders. The silent cowboy had transformed her wedding dress into frontier clothing with careful knife work. She looked like any other traveler passing through. He watched from the canyon rim as she approached the town's edge. His pale eyes tracked her movement until she disappeared behind the first row of buildings. The general store stood empty as a tomb. Evangeline slipped through the back door, avoiding the main street where Colt's deputies might patrol. Dust motes danced in morning light. Her footsteps echoed hollow on wooden planks. She moved through the storage room toward Josiah's hidden records. More journals waited behind loose boards. Page after page of careful documentation, names, dates, money demanded and paid. Margaret Sullivan had arrived 6 months ago. Her intended husband, a rancher named Thomas, had suffered a riding accident the day before her wedding. Colt had offered protection and marriage. She'd refused and vanished 2 days later. Sarah Chun had come from San Francisco to marry the town doctor. The doctor had died from a sudden fever. Sarah's body was found in the river a week after declining. Colt's proposal, a pattern carved in blood and terror. Footsteps creaked on the front porch. Evangeline froze, journal pressed against her chest. The door handle turned slowly. Anyone in there? Deputy Walsh's voice carried lazy authority. Store's supposed to be empty. She pressed herself against the storage room wall. held her breath. The deputy's boots crossed the main floor, stirring dust with each step. A minute passed. 2. The footsteps retreated. The door closed with a soft click. Evangeline waited another 10 minutes before emerging. She gathered the most damning journals and slipped them into her satchel. Evidence of a systematic reign of terror. The schoolhouse sat at the town's heart. White-painted walls and a bell tower that reached toward heaven. Children's laughter drifted through open windows. 23 innocents, just as Colt had said. She watched from across the street as Miss Clara Booth led the children in morning lessons. Young, pretty, dark hair pinned back in a practical bun. The kind of woman who drew men's attention whether she wanted it or not. Clara glanced up from her lesson book. Their eyes met through the window. Something passed between them. A recognition, a shared understanding of danger. After school, Evangeline followed Clara to the mercantile. The teacher moved with careful precision, never drawing attention to herself. She purchased flour and sugar with exact change. Spoke politely to other customers. Kept her eyes down when men addressed her. But her fingers trembled when she counted. Coins. Outside the store, Clara dropped her handkerchief. Evangeline retrieved it and pressed it back into her hand along with a small note. Clara's fingers closed around both, without acknowledgement. That evening, they met behind the church. Shadows pooled deep between headstones. Clara arrived first, clutching her shawl tight against the wind. "You're supposed to be dead." Clara's voice carried no surprise, only weary acceptance. Colt's told that lie before. About the others. Clara glanced toward the sheriff's office. Light glowed yellow in the windows. "I wondered. You knew about Margaret and Sarah. I suspected. But suspicion isn't proof." Clara pulled a small notebook from her reticle. "I've been keeping records, quietly." The pages revealed meticulous observations. Times when Colt left town alone. Money that appeared without explanation. Conversations overheard in the sheriff's office where she sometimes cleaned. Why? Evangeline studied the teacher's face. Why risk this? Clara was quiet for a long moment. Wind stirred dust between the graves. "My brother worked for Sheriff Hendricks before Colt arrived." He started, asking questions about missing tax money. Found dead in a hunting accident a week later. Colt? Can't prove it. But Jimmy was the best tracker in 3 counties. He doesn't get lost in familiar woods. They shared the bitter communion of loss. Sisters in grief bound by Colt's shadow. "There's someone helping me." Evangeline chose her words carefully. Someone who knows Colt's history. The drifter. Clara nodded. "I've seen him watching. Never causes trouble. Never speaks." "He can't speak. Colt took that from him too." Clara's notebook slipped from her fingers. Pages scattered across weathered headstones. How many people has he destroyed? They gathered. The loose papers in silence. Wind whipped harder through the cemetery, carrying the scent of rain and distant fires. Federal marshals patrol this territory. Clara smoothed a crumpled page. But they only come through twice a year. Last visit was 4 months ago. When's the next? Christmas. 2 months away. Too long. Too many chances for Colt to eliminate witnesses, to consolidate power, to destroy more lives. We need proof he can't explain away. Evangeline pulled Josiah's journals from her satchel. Evidence that demands action. Clara read by moonlight. Her face grew paler with each page. The systematic documentation of corruption painted Colt as more than a bad sheriff. He was a predator wearing a badge. This isn't enough. Clara closed the journal. He'll say Josiah was crazy, making up stories. Then we get more. Fresh proof. Current crimes. How? Evangeline pointed toward the sheriff's office. You clean there twice a week. You've seen his private papers. I can't read them openly. He watches everything. Then we make him careless. Give him something else to focus on. Understanding dawned in Clara's eyes. You want to use yourself as bait. He thinks I'm dead. When he learns I'm alive, he'll be angry, desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. Desperate men also kill to protect themselves. They parted ways as clouds gathered overhead. Another storm approaching. The wind carried promises of change, but change could bring destruction as easily as hope. Evangeline made her way back through dark streets toward the canyon. Behind every lighted window lived families trapped by fear. Children who went to bed wondering if tomorrow would bring new horrors. Adults who bent their heads and paid Colt's tribute rather than risk everything. She passed the saloon where Colt's deputies drank and laughed. Their voices carried cruel humor. Jokes about travelers who'd vanished. Bets on how long the new arrivals would last. At the canyon's edge, the silent cowboy waited. He'd built no fire tonight. Sat motionless on a boulder, watching the town below. She settled beside him and shared what she'd learned. He listened without moving. When she finished, he pulled out his carving knife and a piece of wood. His hands moved swift and sure in the darkness. The new token showed a chessboard. Pieces arranged for battle. A queen moving to protect her king while a knight flanked from an unexpected angle. Strategy. She touched the carved queen, not just revenge. He nodded, pulled out another token. This one showed a wolf pack surrounding a lone buffalo. The message was clear. Together, they were stronger. But strength meant nothing without wisdom. And wisdom demanded understanding their enemy completely. From his pocket, he withdrew a worn piece of leather. Unfolded it carefully. Inside lay a military photograph. Young men in Union blue, arms around each other's shoulders. Brothers forged in war's fire. The medic stood on the left, clean-shaven, eyes bright with purpose. On the right, Sergeant Colt smiled with genuine warmth. Between them, 3 other soldiers whose faces had been carefully scratched out. The others from your unit. She studied the damaged photograph. What happened to them? He took the photo back. Traced the scratched faces with one finger. His throat worked silently, muscles straining against words that wouldn't come. A new token appeared. This one showed gold coins changing hands. Confederate officers counting money. Union soldiers lying dead in the background. He sold your position to the enemy. The cowboy's hands shook. The photograph fluttered in the wind. For a moment, she thought he might speak. His lips parted. Air moved through his throat. Nothing emerged but silence. How did you survive? Another token. A field hospital tent. Bodies stacked outside. A figure crawling away through tall grass, bleeding but alive. You played dead. He touched his throat again. This time she understood. The injury wasn't from Confederate bullets. Colt had left him for dead, but not before ensuring his silence. A knife across the vocal cords, quick and precise. The storm broke overhead. Rain fell in heavy drops that turned dust to mud. They retreated to the cave, but the darkness felt different now. Charged with purpose and terrible knowledge. Tomorrow would bring the next phase. Evangeline would reveal herself to Colt. The game would begin in earnest. But tonight, in the depths of stone and shadow, 2 broken souls found something neither had expected. Not healing, not yet, but hope. The rain drummed against rock. Thunder rolled across the canyon. And in the silence between storm sounds, the cowboy's damaged throat produced something it hadn't in 3 years. A whisper. Barely audible. Broken and raw. Together, they spent 2 days crafting the deception. The silent cowboy found a torn piece of Evangeline's wedding dress caught on canyon brush. He placed it carefully near the river bend where currents ran swift and deep. Added drops of rabbit blood to the fabric. Scattered her buttons on the rocky shore. The story would write itself. Desperate woman throws herself into rushing water rather than face Colt's justice. Body swept downstream. Another tragic ending to a stubborn woman's foolish resistance. Evangeline watched. from the ridge as Deputy Walsh discovered the evidence. His shouts carried up the canyon walls. Within an hour, half the town gathered at the riverbank. Colt arrived on horseback, his face a mask of theatrical concern. Tragic loss. His voice, projected across the water, could have been avoided if she'd been reasonable. The townspeople nodded and murmured agreement. Fear disguised as sympathy. They dispersed quickly, eager to distance themselves from Colt's wrath. That evening, Colt celebrated at the saloon. Drinks flowed freely. His deputies laughed too loud at his jokes. The sheriff held court like a king who'd vanquished a troublesome enemy. From the shadows, Evangeline watched him toast his victory. Her death had made him bold, reckless. The next morning brought devastating news. Miss Clara Booth received an unexpected visitor at the schoolhouse. Colt arrived during arithmetic lessons, his hat in his hands and artificial sorrow painting. His features, "Children, you may go home early today." His voice carried false kindness. "Miss Booth and I have important matters to discuss." 23 young faces filed out in confused silence. Clara remained at her desk, hands folded, spine straight. A doe sensing the hunter's approach. "You've heard about Miss Hartwell's unfortunate end." Colt closed the schoolhouse door. Terrible waste. "Could have had a fine life here." Clara's knuckles whitened. "Yes, sir, very sad. Leaves me in a difficult position. Man in my position needs a wife. Someone respectable. Someone who understands how things work in Crimson Ridge." The arithmetic problems on the blackboard seemed to mock the room's sudden darkness. Numbers that added up to nothing. Solutions that solved nothing. "I'm honored by your consideration." Clara's voice stayed level. "But I'm not looking for marriage. Wasn't asking your preference." Colt moved closer. "Announcing my decision. The children need their teacher. Children need order, stability. A sheriff's wife would provide excellent guidance for their moral development." Clara stood slowly. Chalk dust drifted from her hands. "And if I decline, then you'd follow Miss Hartwell's path." His smile turned cold as river stones. "Though perhaps your journey would end differently. Accidents happen to women who walk alone at night." The threat hung between them heavy as smoke. Clara understood. Everyone in Crimson Ridge understood. Resistance meant death. Compliance meant survival. But survival at what cost? "I need time to consider." "You have until Sunday." Colt placed his hat back on his head. "We'll announce the engagement after church service. Wedding follows in 2 weeks." The door slammed behind him. Clara sank into her chair, 23 empty desks stretching before her in accusation. She'd failed them, failed herself, failed every woman who'd suffered Colt's attention. That afternoon, Evangeline revealed herself. Clara was walking home from school when a figure stepped from behind the church. The teacher's composure cracked. Her books scattered across dusty ground. "You're alive." Disappointed? Terrified. Clara looked around frantically. "If he sees you, if anyone tells him." "He won't see me." "But you're going to help make sure." "He knows." They retreated to the cemetery where headstones provided cover from prying eyes. Clara's hands shook as she gathered her scattered books. "He proposed today. Ordered me to marry him." Evangeline felt the familiar cold rage. Another woman trapped. Another life claimed by Colt's hunger for control. When? Sunday announcement. Wedding in 2 weeks. Perfect. Clara stared at her. Perfect? How is any of this perfect? Because. Now he's overconfident, making public commitments. When I appear at your engagement announcement, he'll have to react in front of witnesses. He'll kill us both. Maybe, or maybe the town will finally see him for what he is. The wind picked up, stirring dust between the graves. Clara's books fluttered in her arms, pages threatening to scatter again. "There's something else." Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "Something I haven't told you." She opened her school ledger to the back pages. Hidden among lesson plans and attendance records were carefully coded notes, names, dates, financial records. I've been writing to federal authorities, not marshals, someone higher. Someone who can act on evidence of widespread corruption. Evangeline studied the coded entries. How long? 6 months. Since my brother died. Clara turned the page. They're coming. A federal investigator. He'll arrive within the week. The revelation hit Evangeline like cold water. You've been planning this. Someone had to. The marshals who come through here twice a year are bought. They see what Colt wants them to see. Leave with full bellies and heavy pockets. Does Colt? No, I don't think so. But he suspects something. He's been watching me more carefully. Asking questions about my correspondence. Understanding dawned terrible and clear. That's why he's rushing the marriage. You're not just a trophy, you're a threat. Clara closed the ledger. Her hands had stopped shaking. Purpose steadied her voice. My brother kept records too. Hidden. Them before he died. I know where. What kind of records? Financial. Names of everyone who's paid protection money. Amounts. Dates. 3 years' worth of systematic extortion. They walked deeper into the cemetery where older headstones leaned at drunken angles. Time and weather had worn the names smooth, but the dead remained. Witnesses to decades of injustice. Show me. Clara led her to a weathered monument marking the grave of Crimson Ridge's founder. The base had cracked over years of freezing and thawing. She worked her fingers into the crevice and withdrew a wrapped package. Inside lay Jimmy Booth's final gift to justice. Page after page of meticulous documentation. Every business owner who'd paid Colt's tribute. Every traveler who'd been robbed. Every suspicious death that followed resistance. This is enough to hang him. Evangeline turned pages with reverent care. Federal court would convict on half this evidence. If we live long enough to present it. The weight of their situation settled between them. They held proof of Colt's crimes, but they also held death sentences. Knowledge this dangerous wouldn't stay secret long. A figure emerged from behind. The founder's monument. The silent cowboy stepped into view, moving with predatory grace. Both women tensed until they recognized him. He'd heard everything. His pale eyes took in the evidence, the frightened teacher, the impossible odds they faced. From his pocket, he produced a fresh carved token. This one showed 3 figures standing against a larger army. David facing Goliath. The few confronting. The many, but there was something else in the carving. Something that made Evangeline's breath catch. The largest figure, the one representing Colt, bore a deep scar across its throat. You know something we don't. She studied his scarred face. About Colt, something that changes everything. He nodded slowly, produced another token. This one showed a man in a sheriff's uniform standing over an open grave. But the face wasn't Colt's, it was the previous sheriff, Hendricks. Colt didn't. Just replace Hendricks. Understanding hit her like lightning. He killed him. The cowboy's throat worked. His lips formed words that wouldn't come. Finally, he managed a single broken syllable. Witnessed. Clara dropped her books again. You saw him murder Sheriff Hendricks? Another nod. Another token. This one showed a figure hiding behind rocks, watching 2 men struggle near a cliff edge. Why didn't you stop it? He touched his scarred throat, pointed to the date carved into the token's base. 3 years ago. The same time he'd lost his voice. Colt saw you. Evangeline pieced it together. After he killed Hendricks, he found you watching. The cowboy pulled out the photograph of his old unit, pointed to Colt's smiling face, then drew his finger across his own throat. He recognized you from the war, thought you were dead. A final token appeared. This one showed 2 men grappling. A knife flashing, one figure falling while the other walked away. He tried to finish what he started during the war. But you Survived again. The cowboy touched his voice box. 3 years of silence. 3 years of planning revenge. 3 years of watching Colt's evil grow unchecked. But now they had everything. Eyewitness testimony to murder. Financial records proving corruption. Federal attention focused on Crimson Ridge. The trap was set. All they needed was to survive long enough to spring it. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Another storm approaching. But this time, Evangeline wasn't afraid of the lightning. She was counting on it. Sunday morning arrived with blood-red sunrise. Evangeline watched from the canyon as townspeople filed into the white church. Men in their best suits. Women clutching children's hands. Everyone moving with the careful precision of people who knew they were being watched. Clara stood at the church steps in a blue dress that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. Her face was pale as winter bone. Colt beside her, hand possessive on her elbow, smiled for the gathering crowd. The silent cowboy crouched next to Evangeline on the ridge. His breathing had grown shallow over the past 3 days. The approaching confrontation pulled at old wounds. His hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. "You don't have to do this," she touched his arm. "I can handle Colt alone." He shook his head, pulled out a token showing 2 figures back to back, surrounded by enemies. Partnership carved in wood and determination. "Your voice." He touched his throat, worked his jaw soundlessly. The single word he'd managed 3 nights ago had cost him everything. Blood had trickled from the corner of his mouth. Afterward, the damaged tissue wasn't healing, it was tearing. But he'd spoken. For the first time in 3 years, sound had emerged from his ruined throat. Below, Reverend Morrison called the congregation to worship. His voice carried across the morning air, thin and reedy. A man who'd learned to preach carefully in Colt's domain. Evangeline rose and began picking her way down the canyon wall. Time to rejoin the living. Time to speak for the dead. The church filled with the sound of reluctant hymns. Voices raised not in joy but in obligation. Music became another form of submission in Crimson Ridge. She slipped through the back door during the second verse. Found a seat in the rear pew beside Mrs. Henderson, the baker's wife. The woman's eyes widened in recognition and terror. "She." Evangeline kept her voice low. "Keep singing." Words spread through the congregation in glances and whispered gasps. The dead woman had returned. Colt's victory celebration had been premature. At the front of the church, Clara's voice faltered mid-hymn. She'd spotted Evangeline in the back. Relief and fear warred across her features. Colt noticed Clara's distraction, followed her gaze. His face went through several emotions rapidly. Surprise, anger, calculation. He recovered quickly, but not before half the congregation saw his composure crack. Reverend Morrison finished his sermon on obedience and moral duty. Standard fare for a preacher walking the tightrope between God and gunmen. His eyes found Evangeline several times, but he continued without acknowledgement. "Before we close in prayer," Colt rose from the front pew, "I have joyful news to share with you all." The congregation held its collective breath. "Miss Clara Booth has done me the honor of accepting my proposal of marriage." His voice projected confidence, but sweat beaded his forehead. "We'll be wed next Sunday after service." Polite applause rippled through the church, the sound of hands clapping for a funeral. Furthermore, Colt's eyes locked on Evangeline. "I'm pleased to see that reports of Miss Hartwell's death were greatly exaggerated." The applause died. Silence stretched. "Taut as a bowstring, Miss Hartwell." Colt's voice carried across the pews. "Perhaps you'd like to share with the congregation where you've been these past few days?" Evangeline stood slowly. Every head turned to watch her. She walked down the center aisle with measured steps, her boots echoing off wooden floors. "I've been learning the truth about our sheriff." Murmurs rose from the congregation. Colt raised his hand for silence. Truth is a dangerous word, Miss Hartwell, especially when spoken by someone who faked her own death to avoid lawful marriage. Lawful? She stopped 10 feet from the altar. Nothing about you is lawful. The church doors opened. The silent cowboy entered, his presence filling the doorway. Sunlight streamed behind him, casting his face in shadow. Several people gasped. Others crossed themselves. And you bring more lies with you. Colt's hand moved to his gun belt. This drifter has been spreading poison about me. A man who can't even speak to defend his accusations. The cowboy walked down the aisle. Each step deliberate, measured. His pale eyes never left Colt's face. Some secrets don't need words. Evangeline pulled out Jimmy Booth's financial records. Some evidence speaks for itself. She opened the ledger. Read names aloud. Businesses, protection payments. Dates and amounts that painted a picture of systematic corruption. Henderson's Bakery, $50 monthly. Morrison's Feed Store, $35. Thompson's Saloon, $75. Each name hit the congregation like a physical blow. Their shame laid bare, their cowardice documented in careful handwriting. Lies. Colt's voice had lost its smooth authority. A dead man's fantasies. Jimmy Booth wasn't fantasizing when you had him killed. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. The congregation stirred uneasily. You're accusing me of murder? Colt's face darkened. On what evidence? The silent cowboy reached the front of the church. He stood beside the altar, hands at his sides. His throat worked visibly, muscles straining against damaged tissue. When he spoke, his voice came out as broken whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the church. I saw you. The words cost him. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. But they were clear, unmistakable. You killed Sheriff Hendricks. Pushed him off Devil's Drop 3 years ago. Colt's composure shattered completely. You're supposed to be dead. Like Hendricks? Like Jimmy Booth? Like Margaret Sullivan and Sarah Chun? The cowboy's voice grew stronger with each accusation. Pain fueled purpose. Truth demanded expression. I know what you did during the war. How you sold our position to Confederate forces. How you took their gold while our friends died. Prove it. Colt drew his gun. Prove any of it. Already have. Clara rose from the front pew. Federal investigators arrived today. They have copies of everything. Every record. Every witness statement. The church erupted. Voices raised in shock and fear. Some congregants moved toward the doors. Others pressed closer to hear. Colt swung his gun toward Clara. You little witch. You've been planning this. Someone had to. Someone had to speak for the dead. Then join them. The gun roared in the confined space. But Clara wasn't standing where the bullet passed. The silent cowboy had moved with impossible speed, pulling her aside as flame erupted from Colt's barrel. Children screamed. Women shrieked. Men shouted in confusion and terror. Through the chaos, Evangeline heard hoofbeats approaching. Multiple riders, moving fast, federal marshals. She spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. They're here. Colt's eyes went wild. Trapped animal realizing the snare had finally closed. He looked around the church at faces that no longer showed fear. Only disgust. Only hatred finally given permission to surface. You want to see what real power looks like? He reached into his coat. I've got enough dynamite hidden under this building to send us all to meet our maker. The threat hit the congregation like a physical blow. Parents grabbed children. Men pushed toward exits. Panic spread through the pews. But Clara stepped forward. No, you don't. She held up a bundle of red sticks connected by wire. I found your insurance policy last night. Moved it somewhere safe. Colt's face went gray. Impossible. You're not the only one who can plan ahead. The church doors burst open. Federal marshals flooded in, guns drawn. Professional, efficient, men who'd seen corruption before and knew how to end it. Sheriff Colt. The lead marshal's voice cut through the chaos. "You're under arrest for murder, extortion, and treason against the United States." Colt looked around the church one final time, at the congregation that no longer feared him, at the evidence that condemned him, at the witnesses who would testify to his crimes. His shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured balloon. Guess even the devil runs out of luck eventually. The marshals led him away in chains. The church fell silent except for the sound of children crying and adults trying to process what they'd witnessed. Freedom had arrived in Crimson Ridge. But freedom, Evangeline realized, was just the beginning. The federal marshals worked with methodical precision. They cataloged evidence, interviewed witnesses, documented 3 years of systematic corruption that had turned Crimson Ridge into a prison disguised as a town. Lead Marshal Davidson, a weathered man with kind eyes, took statements from everyone who'd suffered under Colt's rule. The list grew longer than anyone had imagined. 37 businesses paying protection money. Davidson reviewed his notes. 12 suspicious deaths, 6 missing persons. And that's just what we can prove. The silent cowboy sat in the church pew, blood still trickling from his damaged throat. Speaking those words in court had cost him dearly, but his voice had held long enough to deliver justice. Clara pressed a clean handkerchief to his neck. "The doctor should look at this." He shook his head, pulled out a wooden token showing a man speaking truth to power. The effort had been worth every drop of blood. Evangeline watched from the altar. As the town began to heal, conversations that had been whispered in shadows now happened in daylight. Children played without checking over their shoulders. Adults walked with straighter spines. Miss Hartwell, Marshal Davidson approached with his notebook. "We'll need your testimony for the federal trial." "When?" 6 months, maybe less. "Depends on how many other cases we uncover." He studied her face. "You planning to stay in Crimson Ridge?" The question hung in the air, heavy as summer heat. She looked around the church where everything had changed, where courage had finally found its voice. For now. 3 days later, they buried Sheriff Hendricks properly. The whole town attended. A man who'd tried to serve with honor deserved better than an unmarked grave in the desert. Reverend Morrison spoke words of justice and redemption. His voice carried new strength. Fear no longer moderated his sermons. The silent cowboy stood at the graveside, hat in his hands. His lips moved in silent prayer. Words meant for old friends who'd died too young. Promises made to brothers who'd never see justice served. Clara touched his elbow. "He knows," she whispered. "Hendricks knows." That evening, Evangeline reopened Josiah's general store. The townspeople came slowly at first, tentative, testing whether normalcy was possible after so much fear. Mrs. Henderson bought flour and sugar, paid with coins instead of worry. Mr. Thompson ordered supplies for his saloon. No protection tax included in the price. "Feels strange," Mrs. Henderson confided. "Doing business without looking over my shoulder." "You'll get used to it." Evangeline measured fabric for a new dress. "Freedom takes practice." The silent cowboy helped arrange merchandise. His hands moved with careful precision, organizing shelves with the same attention he'd given to his wooden tokens. Every item in its proper place. Children gathered around him, fascinated by his collection of carved figures. He'd started making new tokens. These showed scenes of hope instead of trauma. Families reunited, crops growing, laughter echoing through clean streets. His voice remained fractured. Words came slowly, painfully, but he spoke when speaking mattered. Clara established a new school system. No longer would education depend on one teacher's courage. She organized parents into committees, created standards that couldn't be corrupted by fear. Knowledge is power, she told her students, but shared knowledge is strength. The federal investigation expanded beyond Crimson Ridge. Marshal Davidson returned twice with more questions, more evidence, more connections to corruption that spread across 3 territories. Colt wasn't working alone, he explained. He was part of something bigger. A network of corrupt officials who thought they could carve up the frontier for themselves. The trial took place in Denver. Evangeline and the silent cowboy traveled together, along with Clara and a dozen other witnesses. The city felt alien. After months in the desert, too many people, too much noise. But the courthouse was familiar. Justice looked the same everywhere. Colt sat in the defendant's chair, shackled and gray. Prison had hollowed his cheeks, stripped away the arrogance that had once made him untouchable. He looked smaller, older, defeated. His eyes found the silent cowboy in the gallery. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not hatred. Just recognition that accounts had finally been settled. The verdict came swift and sure. Guilty on all counts. 25 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. As the marshals led him away, Colt spoke his final words to his former friend. "You always were too stubborn to die." The cowboy's response came clear despite his damaged throat. Someone had to survive to tell the truth. They returned to Crimson Ridge as heroes. The town had planned a celebration. Banners hung across Main Street. Tables groaned under potluck contributions. Children ran between adults, laughing without fear. But Evangeline felt restless. The store was thriving. The town was healing. Her part in this story was ending. That night, she found the cowboy on his favorite ridge, watching stars wheel overhead. He'd carved a new token. This one showed a crossroads with paths leading in different directions. "You're thinking about leaving." She settled beside him on the warm stone. He nodded, pointed to the eastern path carved on the token. "Where will you go?" He pulled out a letter. The paper was worn from handling. The envelope showed a return. Address in Kansas, another town, another plea for help. "They need what we learned here." She read the letter by starlight. People trapped by corrupt officials, families living in fear. He carved another token while she read. This one showed 2 figures on horseback, riding toward a distant sunrise. "Together?" she asked. He offered her the token. Their fingers touched as she accepted it. Calloused hands marked by hard work and harder choices. "What about Clara, the store?" "Everything we've built?" He pointed to the town below. Lights glowed in windows. Families gathered around dinner tables. Children slept safely in their beds. "They don't need us anymore," she realized. "They can take care of themselves." The next morning brought farewells. Clara hugged them both, tears streaming down her cheeks. "All right," she promised. "Let you know how we're doing." "Send letters to the Marshal Service," Evangeline suggested. "They'll know where to find us." The townspeople gathered to see them off, hands shaken, gratitude expressed, promises made to remember what they'd learned about courage and justice. Evangeline rode Josea's old horse. The cowboy sat his familiar mount, both animals eager for the trail. As they reached the edge of town, he spoke one final time to Crimson Ridge. "Be free," his voice carried on the morning wind. A blessing, a command, a promise that freedom was possible for those brave enough to claim it. They rode east toward Kansas, toward new challenges, toward people who needed hope and hadn't yet learned to find it themselves. Behind them, Crimson Ridge gleamed in the morning sun, clean, bright, alive. Ahead lay the endless frontier. Towns trapped in corruption, families living in fear, stories waiting to be changed by courage and truth. The silent cowboy was silent no more. His voice might be broken, but his words carried power. The power to speak for those who couldn't. speak for themselves. Evangeline had found her purpose. Not as a mail-order bride seeking security, not as a victim of other people's cruelty, but as a woman who chose to stand against injustice wherever she found it. Together, they rode toward the horizon. Two souls who'd learned that healing came not from forgetting the past, but from using its lessons to build a better future. The sun climbed higher, the desert bloomed around them. And somewhere in the distance, another town waited for the news that freedom was possible. They carried that news in their hearts, in their hands, in their willingness to speak truth to power. The story of Crimson Ridge was ending. The story of justice was just beginning. 6 months later, a letter arrived at the marshal's office in Denver. It bore a Kansas postmark and familiar handwriting. Topeka is free. Moving on to Colorado. We'll write when we can. E&W. Marshal Davidson smiled and filed the letter with the others. 12 towns. 12 victories. 12 communities learning to stand on their own. He pulled out a map of the frontier, marked the places where corruption had been rooted out, where fear had been replaced by hope. The network was vast, but so was the determination of those who opposed it. Somewhere on the trail, a mail-order bride and a silent cowboy continued their mission, bringing justice to the lawless, giving voice to the voiceless, proving that even in the darkest places, light could still shine. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.